This is as bad as I've seen the Steelers play all year. These division games are like this. Throw the records out the window. That's not just cliche, that's real.
And you sense something coming now for the Steelers. Just finds, comes up.
It's about finishing in the fourth quarter.
Finley will keep it right up the middle. It'll be a great Christmas week here in Cincinnati.
All right, Monday Night Football, the Steelers suffer a huge loss to the big underdog Bengals. So let's look at the tight race in the AFC North right now. The Steelers still in first place after losing 3 straight, followed by Baker and the Browns, then Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. Neek, you're up first. This is a tough one. Which AFC North quarterback do you trust the most right now?
It's not tough for me. I think it's Lamar Jackson. He's the player that I trust the most in this division at all times. He's has this team on his back. So I understand that you can be critical of many things that he does, but he plays the game differently than a lot of quarterbacks. But he's by far the best quarterback in his division. And I don't think very many people would argue with you on that point. I think the only reasonable pushback is that he hasn't had success in the playoffs, but I don't think that's because of him necessarily. The game he played last year wasn't perfect, but it was not abysmal. I think Lamar Jackson is the best player. He's taken somewhat of a regression this season statistically, but what he means to this offense hasn't changed. So I think as well as Baker's doing, it's predicated on their running attack. It's predicated on their receivers and tight ends. It's not Baker. They've tried to simplify the game as much as possible, try to Kirk Cousins this offense in a way that they don't ask a whole lot from Baker. And the same thing is true, frankly, of Ben Roethlisberger, is they try to surround him with a lot of great playmakers, and he makes short completions in hopes that they can turn it into something bigger, and they have that outstanding defense to help him. That's not the same situation in Baltimore, especially now with the injuries to their secondary. They are relying on Lamar Jackson more and more, and he seems to be coming up, at least in the last game, last couple games, honestly, he seems to be coming up bigger and bigger. Though he hasn't done it all season, he's doing it at this moment as they head into the playoffs. I don't know how you could argue for anybody else in this division.
Unfortunately, we agree about this. I think it is Lamar, but I have a few things to say about that before I tell you my thoughts about the other two guys. Number one, Lamar Jackson, I do trust him the most, and I saw what he did against the Browns, and that really showed something. You know, when they needed him to, he got back out on the field on 4th down and touches the ball, and boom, touchdown pass, first thing on 4th and 5. And then 4 completions, right, to get him in field goal range. After Baker marched him right down the field. That showed some stuff. But when you say who do you trust the most or who do you have the most faith in, it's not just that Lamar hasn't won in the playoffs, Dominique. Lamar has beaten a lot of good teams in his career. It's not that they know how to defend him now and there's nothing he can do. No, he's beaten very good teams, a lot of them already. But that's not really the issue to me. The issue is the 2 playoff games, yes, because if you want to win a Super Bowl, you must win in the playoffs. If you're in the AFC North, you must beat the Ben Roethlisberger Steelers. And if you're in the AFC, you must beat the Chiefs. He's 0-6 in those games. So those specific games where I'm like, those games where I'm really looking, okay, now I'm watching Lamar. He's played some of his worst football, in fact. And I think that is until I see him beat those teams, I'll reserve judgment about whether I can trust him with the money on the line, right, even if at this moment I would take him in the division. Now, I'll tell you this. I trust Baker Mayfield more than Ben Roethlisberger right now. I didn't think I would say that earlier this season, but I trust Baker more than Roethlisberger. Roethlisberger can't throw the ball down the field. When he tries, it's usually a bad idea. And when you keep throwing those short passes, eventually guys are going to figure that out and start taking the ball away, as you have seen. Baker Mayfield, whatever you want to say, they simplified things, whatever. Baker is one of those guys who is highly dependent on his situation and coaching. That's most NFL quarterbacks. Very few Mahomeses and Rodgers and Bradys who are going to be great anywhere. It's just the degree of their accomplishment where coaching and situation matters, but they were going to be great no matter what. Most guys are not independently great. And Baker falls into the most guys category. But he had 4 head coaches in a little over 2 seasons to start his career. Head coaches, and they were all bad. Hugh Jackson, worst head coach in the league. Greg Williams just made a play call so bad, he's out of the NFL, probably for good. Freddie Kitchens was a disaster. The first time you gave him a good head coach, the first time, he's looking really good. So at this moment, I'll take Baker over Roethlisberger.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to argue. Like, I think Baker is doing well, and I picked them to make the playoffs this year. I'm impressed with how Baker is playing. But when you get down into the nitty-gritty of analyzing what's actually happening, like, Baker is making plays, and I think that Baltimore game is one example where he stepped up and he kind of put the team on his back for a short period of time. So I think he deserves credit for that. But let's not act like we haven't seen Ben Roethlisberger do that multiple times. If you look from game to game, who has more pressure and who delivers more often, I think it's Ben Roethlisberger through the course of this season. And I'm not going to boil all this down to recency bias because Ben is playing poorly right now and Baker is on a pretty good run. I think when you watch these games, who is asked to make the plays in big-time situations more often and who comes through more often, I think the answer is definitely Ben Roethlisberger over Baker Mayfield. And I'm glad that we don't have much to argue about the Lamar Jackson situation. I'm glad we agree on that, but it still feels like you're making it seem like it's closer than it should be. And you're pointing out these big games as if I understand he should win in those. You want the team to win in those situations, but it all doesn't fall on Lamar. And they played the Chiefs close a couple years ago. They played the Chiefs close, and beating the Steelers without Ben Roethlisberger, it's tough to do when Ben Roethlisberger isn't playing. So when the Ravens were at their strongest, Ben Roethlisberger wasn't there. They definitely would have beaten them last year in that situation. The Ravens team has been decimated by injuries first, and then 4 different strands of the coronavirus goes through their locker room. They're having not the perfect season, but Lamar's putting them on their back. I think the question is pretty simple. The answer is pretty simple. And given that I'm from Baltimore, you look at Lamar Jackson and the Ravens are Drew Hill, and he's Cisco. They are nothing without him. You look at Baker Mayfield, it's closer to Jodeci, and he's like Mr. Dalvin. He's not KC or JoJo. That offense is built on the backs of that running game and that offensive line. And that's when you take one person out of the situation, there is only one Cisco in that whole division. The rest of them are Dalvin, Devontae, there's somebody else. Woody,
Lamar
Jazz,
Jackson.
They are not the man.
What are you going to go through You're going through every R&B group? Look, what you're pointing out is Lamar Jackson is differently talented. Lamar Jackson, if we're talking about who's the most talented, Baker Mayfield's okay. Like, he's got some talent, but he's not, oh, my God. And Ben Roethlisberger at this stage in his career also. Lamar Jackson's clearly the best. He's got the most. Now I got to see him do it with the chips on the line. And I pointed out where in games against those three different situations, he's 0-6, and he's almost undefeated the rest of the time. That tells me something. Mm-hmm. I thought the Browns game was a good step in that direction, but I still reserve judgment.
All right, the Ravens probably have the easiest schedule, Giants and Bengals left. By the way, when you mention Cisco, you know what Freudian song is stuck in my head. I can just see Max in Cancun now on